Alright, now is the time. Let's see if this thing is either going to smoke or boot up. Yes! Alright, it is working. Wow. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, we're able to run code. We have the keyboard working. Our graphics display is not corrupted, so that is fantastic news. Hello everyone, welcome back to Retro Computing Ranch. So, as you just saw, the Commodore 64 that we've rebuilt is now working. So, I could take a whole bunch of video and show you a montage of the 30 some odd hours it took me to do this rebuild, or we could do a post-mortem and talk about tools and techniques. I'd like to go the second route because I think that's more interesting. So, here's the original board after I've removed all the parts, and I will include a picture here to show you the issues that I was having. There are tons of lifted pads on this bottom row, and there are a few traces that have come up as well. So, after I determined that this board was going to be unusable, I ordered a replacement board. I found a seller on eBay that sells replacement PCBs for Commodore 64s. You have to make sure that you take a look at what your assembly number is and buy that assembly number. So, once you do that, you will start pulling parts out of your old printed circuit board. And what I recommend doing, at least for the passives, so like your resistors, capacitors, diodes, jumpers, that sort of thing, pull them out one at a time, transplant them one at a time. That takes quite a while to do, but that way you make sure that you're not mixing parts up. At the same time, while you're doing that, you can use a multimeter or a component tester to test the parts. So you don't have to spend a ton of money there. You can go buy like a Fluke 87. I've got one here. I use it for a lot of general purpose stuff. But you can even go on to vendor of your choice. Amazon, eBay, Walmart.com, wherever. I think I paid about 12 bucks for this T4 component tester. It'll do transistors, capacitors, diodes, coils, all kinds of stuff. Super cheap and very, very useful. I highly recommend it. So, as you're moving those components over, my dogs are going crazy out there. As you move those components over, like I said, do them one at a time so that you don't get lost and mix components up. Now, you're also going to most likely want to put in sockets for your integrated circuits. That way, if an integrated circuit goes bad at some point, you can just pull it out and stick a new one in. Now, for the sockets and for the electrolytic capacitors, because I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors on here, I'm not a fan of just going and replacing all the capacitors on a board, but since I was transplanting all the components and I was already going to have all the capacitors out, I went ahead and did that. I covered figuring out what parts we needed and ordering them in a previous video. The vendor that I used for that is Mouser. Now, you can use DigiKey or whoever. I would recommend going with one of the larger suppliers. That way you're making sure you're not getting fake or counterfeit parts. I don't have any kind of relationship with Mouser other than the fact that they're in the same state that I am. And so when I order something from Mouser, it typically gets here in 1 to 2 days, even if I pay the lowest cost ground shipping. So once you get all those components in, you can start populating your board. And part of the process of moving the components from one board to the other, now of course, you don't necessarily have to worry about damaging the old board. but you want to make sure you get the parts put in correctly in your new board. It will help removing parts from your old board if you use the right equipment to do that. Now, you don't have to spend a ton of money. You can get Pacific Rim components and equipment to do that. You can go get brand name, but you don't have to have brand name. I think I purchased this off of Amazon for 150 bucks, 175 bucks. That was a few years ago. They're probably more expensive now. This is a vacuum desoldering station where you just put this over the pin, pull the trigger, the vacuum from the desoldering station pulls the solder out. Now you will have to very frequently pull that back, and then you will have to clean out where it traps the solder. So that's one thing to be aware of. If you're doing something like this, you're probably going to be cleaning the trap on this every 5 to 7 minutes. So the other thing that comes in a lot of handy is a hot air rework station. I got this used from, it was almost an estate, but it was really that somebody had reached out to our local ham radio club. Her and her husband had gotten a divorce. He'd moved back to Eastern Europe. He left all of his ham radio stuff and tools behind. She wanted help getting rid of it. I went in and paid her money for all of that stuff. This was included in it, so I brought this home. And this is very handy for like IC sockets. After you've used the vacuum desoldering station to remove as much solder as you can come along with your hot air rework station and heat the entire area, perhaps on both sides, and then put something underneath. Now, maybe an IC extractor or a screwdriver or a pick, something along those lines, and work that IC out without damaging any pins on the IC. And so that's very useful there. So when you start putting the components into the new board, you're probably going to want to re-straighten the pins, and then you're also going to want to, after they're in and you've soldered them, use some flush cutters to cut your leads as flush as you can against your solder joint. Now, let's talk about methodology here, because there's a right way and a wrong way to populate a board. What I like to do is to start with the lowest profile components first. So that's typically going to be resistors, diodes, things along those lines. Those are the items where you can put them in the board. I like to use blue painter's tape. So I might put in one or a couple of components, tape them down with a piece of painter's tape, flip the board over, solder it, remove the painter's tape, and then as you work your way up to the taller components, you're not having to worry about a component falling out of the board as you solder it in place. So, like for instance, transformers, your various DIN sockets on the board, do those last. And then what you'll end up with is you'll have a board that has a lot of flux on the back. That's just an awful issue. You don't want to leave that flux there. It goes rock hard over time, and it makes serviceability very bad. I washed the board in my Commodore 64 with the highest concentration isopropyl alcohol I could find, and it still took me probably 45 minutes to an hour to get that flux off. But then what it had done is that it had run a lot of that residue onto the top side of the board, and so I came back with acetone on a cotton swab, and I cleaned as much of the area of the board as I can. You want to make sure that the board is clean. One, of course, for the looks of the board, but then also, two, if your board is contaminated, it can lead to intermittent issues where maybe something is shorting out, or the inner electrode capacitance is different, so things aren't working correctly. If you want to make sure that your computer is going to work as well as possible, you want to make sure your board is clean. The other thing that you're going to need, of course, is a good soldering iron. A lot of people go with the Heiko FX888D. I happen to have this older iron. This is a Weller TC202. I've had this iron for, I'm going to say probably somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I bought it used at a thrift store, and it has been invaluable to me. It is one of the best irons I've ever had, and you can't go wrong with it. Now, you're also going to need a few other things. A lot of people like to use a wet sponge, an actual real sponge, to keep their tip clean. I like to use this Brillo or Chorboy style tip cleaner. And what I do, you can get liquid flux. Make sure it's rosin flux, not acid flux. You can put a little bit of that in there, and it helps keep the tip even cleaner. You're also going to want to make sure you have some desoldering braid. You can do the same thing. You can apply some of this liquid flux to the braid, and then when you heat it, it pulls the solder from whatever joint you're desoldering up into the braid. It makes desoldering braid much easier to use. The other thing is to use a quality solder. So I like Kester leaded solder. Usually, what is this, like a 60-40? I haven't really used lead-free solder. I still use leaded solder. You just have to take some extra precautions. Make sure you wash your hands before you touch your face, eat or drink, anything along those lines. And so that's pretty much it. Let's see here. You're also going to need some way to look at your joints that you've soldered. So what you're going to want to do, and this is a loop. I'll have to take my glasses off here. I'll put it up against my eye, and then I will look closely at each and every joint. And I will make sure that each and every joint has proper flow out, that it's not a cold joint, that it's a fully soldered joint. And doing that will make sure that you have as great a chance as possible of your equipment working when you fire it up. Let's go ahead and do a little close-up work here so I can show you what I'm talking about, like for instance with the component tester. Okay, so let's talk about the ultra cheap component tester that you can get. Like I said, I think this one cost me about $12. It's basically a Pacific Rim clone of a design from more than 10 years ago. But it does a good job, so let's check it out. First thing we're going to do is take our component and put it into the tester socket, if we can get it to seat in. So we're going to pull the ZIF lever back just a little bit. We're going to press the test button. It's going to tell us our battery voltage and that it's testing the component. And so now it is telling us that this is a capacitor. It's a 1 microfarad. It has an ESR of 4.9 ohms and a V loss of 2.9%. This is one of the original capacitors that came from the unit. I'm not thoroughly concerned about it, like I said, but since I was already there, I wanted to replace all those capacitors. Now this will also test transistors, resistors, coils, basically almost a full range of all the components that are on the board, at least when it comes to the parts that I listed. Of course, if you're going to test ICs, you're going to need something different, like for instance a TL866 or a Retro Chip Tester Pro. But this will at least get you far enough along, because like I said, all of your passives and your transistors are the parts that are soldered. You want to make sure those are good before they go into the new main board. As far as the ICs go, they're all socketed. So once you've got the system together, if you're still having an issue, you can troubleshoot and not have to worry about having to possibly damage the board by desoldering your components. So it's good to at least make sure you've tested the great majority of the passives and the transistors. That being said, let me see if there's anything else here on the table now that I'm sitting on the other side of it that is useful. So I like having a brush, which is useful for getting the dust off the board as you're removing components. Some heat sink compound. This is probably a silver-bearing silicone compound. Not necessarily a huge fan of it. I'd rather have a Wakefield compound, but I couldn't find my Wakefield compound. So this will do the job. This goes underneath, I'm not even sure what that is, probably a regulator or power transistor. Down here in this area of the board, there's a heat sink. So you just want to make sure you get some sort of compound on that to do the job. Other than that, oh, I also have a cheaper vacuum desoldering tool. This will, given enough time, let you do the job, but you will have a much easier time of it if you use a vacuum desoldering station instead of a manual vacuum desolderer. But if you have plenty of time and it's not a concern to you, you could do it that way. It's just that, well, I'm sure if you look at the pin counts on the ICs, you will quickly see that there are hundreds of pins that you're dealing with here. And so desoldering, soldering in the new sockets and components, cleaning, checking, all of that stuff takes a huge amount of time. Like I said earlier, I believe I probably spent somewhere between 35 and 40 hours doing this job. Now, at my normal labor rate at my job, it would have been cheaper most likely for me to just go ahead and purchase like a C64U, but there's something about the actual old retro hardware that I like, and I wanted the satisfaction of being able to say that I took something that was vintage, that didn't work, that needed some help, and instead of just like harvesting the SIDs and putting those SIDs in an FPGA replacement, I was able to resurrect an old piece of hardware. It's an amazing feeling to know that you were able to do it, but then also that you invested all of that time and effort, and it in the end paid off because you ended up with a working piece of retro computing hardware that will give you a lot of enjoyment in the future. Now, looking forward, there are a lot of things that still need to be done here. So basically what I have is I have the C64 system unit, and that's it. I have an old power supply, one of the ones that have been known to nuke these C64s. So I either need to buy an aftermarket replacement or build a C64 saver. I'm leaning towards building a C64 saver, which is just basically an interposer that sits between the power supply and the system unit. And if the 5-volt regulator fails and tries to apply 7 volts to all of the logic, it clamps the supply and keeps the damage from happening. I also need storage for this Commodore 64. And I know there are various options out there. Probably going to end up going with something like a Pi 1541, but I'm not sure yet. I need to come up with some joysticks, and I don't even know where I need to go after that. I haven't done enough research to know. I haven't had one of these computers working since the turn of the century, and that's been quite some time. And even back during the 80s, I didn't have one of these during their prime time frame. So the C64 experience is not something that I really had. I'm looking forward to it. If you have suggestions, your favorite programs, your favorite accessories, either from then or from now, go ahead and put them in the comments below. I really want to hear what everybody has to say about where I need to be going and what I need to be doing with this Commodore 64 now that I have one that's working. And I think that's going to cover it for today. I'm really pretty ecstatic about this whole thing that I actually have this working, and I'm really looking forward to moving further along. Hey, I want to thank you for tuning in. Go check out my previous videos on this and other pieces of vintage retro computing hardware. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and I hope you have a great day. We'll see you again soon with another episode.